My name's Nikki Parker. I lead marketing communications here at Insight Partners, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to With Insight. With Insight is a series that we've started to bring together thought leaders from across the software business, philanthropic, and all different industries, to be honest. And then today's With Insight is hosted by Deven Parekh, and we are honored to have Dr. Michael Lomax joining us today. Since 2004, Dr. Lomax has served as president and CEO of UNCF, the nation's largest private provider of scholarships and other educational support to the African American students, and a leading advocate of college readiness. So one thing which is unbelievable when I was getting to know Dr. Lomax is that under his leadership, UNCF has raised more than $3 billion and helped more than 110,000 students earn college degrees and launch their careers. Before joining UNCF, Dr. Lomax was president of Dillard University in New Orleans and a literature professor at UNCF member institutions at Morehouse and Spelman colleges. When you hear the conversation today, you can hear that background in him and in everything that he says. He was also a founding member of the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of African American History and Culture. As someone who was lucky enough to live in DC and go and visit the museum, it is exceptional. So with that, thank you all who have joined today, and I am honored to introduce you to your host, Deven Parekh, and welcome Dr. Michael Lomax.
Thanks, Nikki, as always. Michael, I decided to make you feel at home today. Mine's a little shaggier than yours, but getting there. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm glad to have a fellow beard wearer to talk to today.
So we're here today to obviously commemorate MLK Day. We're doing it early here on Friday. Last night, I actually watched the iDream speech again, and I read a number of his speeches that you talked to me about, and I was just struck, or restruck, I should say, with his way with words.
Yeah.
I thought we'd start with just a quote from his speech in 1963 on the March on Washington. And it goes, he says, "We have come to this hallowed spot to remind America the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism." And what I was struck by is that those words seemed as relevant today as they did in 1963. I don't know, any reaction to that?
Yeah, I unfortunately, Dr. King had a keen view of the future, and the future wasn't always a rosy one, and I was struck, he used the term fierce urgency of now twice, and he used it again in 1967 at Riverside Church on April the 4th, exactly to the day 1 year before he was assassinated. And when I'd like to read just the way he used it then, because it's a different point, very optimistic about the future, momentum in the civil rights movement in 1963. In 1967, he's actually coming out against the war in Vietnam and taking what proved to be an unpopular position within the civil rights movement. You're talking about something that you shouldn't be talking about. And he says again, we are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. There is an invisible book of life that faithfully records our vigilance and our neglect. We still have a choice today: nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. And while he was talking about, an international issue, you think about the way we are getting along in this country today. It's almost as if the choice is between nonviolent coexistence, no matter our differences, or violent co-annihilation. And, I think that means that his powerful words apply not just to race, but really to unity among people. And very powerful, very concerning, very disturbing, but I hope ultimately a path to the future.
Well, it was interesting because I actually read the 67 speech last night as well. And obviously it was a controversial speech at the time because he kind of veered out of his lane. But he makes the case about why the relevance to civil rights is at the time, there was a lot of optimism around the social programs that were being passed in the 60s and the impact they have with, that. So I would recommend everybody read that speech. It's also just unbelievably, and I read it. I didn't actually listen to that one, but I could just, you could hear him. You could hear the way I'm sure he delivered that speech. So it was another beautiful speech. So you actually had the opportunity to meet him when you were 9.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell that story?
Well, my parents were journalists, and they owned a little weekly newspaper in Los Angeles, California from 1940 to 1960. My dad was the publisher and he ran the print shop. And my mother was the editor and she did most of the writing. And in 1956, when the bus boycott began, my mother really believed that this was the story of her journalistic career. And she made the decision in 1957 to do something that she rarely got the chance to do because she had 6 kids, which was to actually go cover something outside of Los Angeles. And so she decided to go to Montgomery, Alabama for a week. And it was a place where a lot of journalists were going. And Dr. King subscribed to the newspaper. So she met Dr. King. She had dinner at the home with Mrs. King and their children, met the leaders of the civil rights movement, and she wrote about it. And then the next year, after the bus boycott was over, Dr. King made a trip to Los Angeles. Now, let me just say, he was not the Nobel Peace Prize winning celebrity in 1957 that he was in January 57 that he would become later. And he stayed at a black hotel in the Sugar Hill neighborhood of Los Angeles, not very far from where we live. And my mom and I drove over to pick him up. And there, standing outside the hotel, was a not very tall guy wearing a big overcoat because it was January and a fedora. He was very dapper. Got in the car and he came over to our home and had ice cream and cake with 6 noisy kids. And my mother interviewed him. That was the first time I ever saw him. In 1961, my mother took all of us south and we lived there for 6 months. And we went back again in 1964 and I went to Morehouse. And it was during that period from 64 until his death in 68 when I would see Dr. King on the Morehouse campus. He came over, by the way.
He was a Morehouse graduate? He was a
Morehouse graduate. He came over to the campus, and there were a couple of times when he led marches from the campus. One of the marches that he led from the campus was the march to the state capitol when they refused to seat Julian Bond, because of his opposition to the war in Vietnam. And then the last time I saw Dr. King was in April of 1968, and I saw him in his casket. I still get emotional about that on the Morehouse College, on the Spelman College campus for his funeral. And tens of thousands of people came to our college campus to pay their respects on his assassination. And I looked down into that funeral on numerous occasions because I was bringing people over, to celebrities who were coming through for the service and wanted to pay their final respects, and saw that this young guy, 39 years old, had given his life that I could have, that our generation could have a very different life. So I would say that powerful impact on me personally, on my generation, my classmates, all of whom participated in celebrating his life at the final event, the funeral, which was held on the Morehouse campus.
So how do you kind of compare the moment, the time then, to today? Obviously, we had the murder of George Floyd, which was kind of a galvanizing moment in a very different way, but in some ways brought back a lot of the same memories from that period in time. So how do you kind of think about this moment versus the 60s?
Well, it's coming, when Emmett Till was murdered in the 1950s, and I was a little boy, and there's another little kid in the South who gets killed, when civil rights workers were killed in the summer of 1964. The violence was no less horrific, but you saw the results of the violence. I have to say that what has happened in the cell phone generation is that it's not just that you see the results of the violence, you actually see the violence occurring. And therein, I mean, for me as a parent, as a grandparent, seeing that my grandkids are seeing this, experiencing this, is deeply disturbing, but it's a fact of life. I actually feel at one level more optimistic, because when people see what is happening, they make a different judgment. I live here in Georgia, that in the case for the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, because people saw it, they could find these men guilty. The fact that in the Floyd murder in Minneapolis, people could see it and they could be outraged, and they could find a way to do something they normally would not do, and that is to find a police officer guilty. So I think that I actually think people are seeing the humanity of one another, but I also think that we live in a time and this is the deeply disturbing part, and where I think we need the voice of Dr. King and the words of Dr. King more than ever. We've got to find a way to live together. I mean, there's this sense of winners and losers. There's this sense that if you win, I lose. If you get something, that's taking something from me.
Which probably goes beyond race, though, right?
Yes, it does go beyond race, but it's nonetheless deeply divisive. And I think that we put too much at risk, and we don't value what it is that we're putting at risk. There's this. I think these are very difficult times. There are a lot of the news is ever present. It's full of breaking news. All of the breaking news is bad. It is in many ways fear-inducing, and it's alienating, and it's distressing and disturbing. I don't know what we do about it. I think the thing that I try to do about that is to stay focused on what are the productive things that I can do, so that when that book gets written, it's a book of not the things that I neglected to do, but it's the things that I found time to do. And then I try to do as Dr. King did at his time, and that is to have the courage to do what I believe is the right thing to do. And, that's something all of us have to come to terms with. I hope that more people will open the book of Dr. King's words, and not just as a kind of archaeological dig on what happened in the past, but to see someone who had so much talent and so much capability and had such a beautiful life in front of him, and he put it all at risk to do what he thought was necessary to do. And he did that in behalf of all of us. And I don't believe he did it just for Black people. He did it for all people. And he did it so that the world might be a better place. And I think we ought to try to live up to that.
So Michael, maybe you could talk a little bit about your journey to the head of UNCF. Nikki kind of talked about it briefly, but maybe you can kind of fill in the story.
Yeah, well, so I just one more 1968 reference. I graduated from Morehouse in 68, and the speaker at my graduation was the executive director of the United Negro College Fund, Bill Trent. So, somehow or another, I kind of think this was meant to be. I took a while to get to this job. I started teaching at Morehouse in 1969 when I finished my master's degree at Columbia, and then I continued teaching there after I got my PhD. I had a detour into electoral politics. I served as chairman of the Fulton County Commission. I used to have to explain what Fulton County was. Everybody now knows
no longer
where Fulton County is. I did that for 14 years. And I ran for mayor of Atlanta and lost convincingly. I mean, there was no question about it that I was in a runoff, but I lost the runoff. And so I returned to higher education in 1993. It was a forced return. And I'd made the decision then that I wanted to be a Black college president. 4 years later, I got a Black college to be president of. I did it at Dillard from 1997 to 2004. And I've been doing higher education work. I went to the United Negro College Fund 17 years ago. And this nearly 80-year-old organization with the quaint name, Negro College Fund.
Which is going to be one of my questions. Is there a reason the name never changed along the way?
You know, I don't believe in changing names, you know, I mean, and it is who we are. And let me just tell you something. The United Negro College Fund was founded after World War II. And it was when all the Black college presidents, then called Negro college presidents, came together and said, you know, we got to raise money to help the students who will return, the people who will return back from World War II, get the education so they can compete in the post-war economy. They enlisted John D. Rockefeller to chair their first campaign. They raised $750,000, equivalent to $10 million. And since then, in the 78 years since then, the organization has raised $5 billion and helped 500,000 students earn a college degree. And I've raised, under my leadership, we've raised 3 of that. And we ain't through. We got to raise even more. But you know, what we've done is we've taken a storied organization with a, you know, kind of a past acknowledging name, and we've made it uncf.org. It is a 21st century social enterprise. It is now not only providing, we're the largest private scholarship provider for Black students and students of color. We do powerful work getting resources from the federal government in behalf of low-income students going to college, and that means Black students. And today, you know, historically Black colleges are experiencing a renaissance. People know them, they know what they do, and they're experiencing a renaissance because in spite of all the improvements we've made, Black students still like to go to Black colleges. And these institutions, which primarily serve first-generation low-income students. 75% of our students are what we call Pell eligible. That means they are from the lowest income families, and about 50% of the first in the families to go to college. But when they get that degree, they are catapulted up into a different economic stratum, and they don't just make a difference for themselves, they make a difference for their family and their community. And we need to keep seeing that economic and social mobility, because I think that that work is, you know, a lot of the work that will, you know, reduce the sense of grievance and also close the gaps that, you know, continue to exist in our country. And I believe we're an abundant country, Devin. I believe that that human talent is abundant, but opportunity is rationed. And if we could open up more opportunity to more talent, the world would be a better place. And I certainly think our country would be. And I believe that the key to opportunity, certainly in the United States of America, is education. And that's why every day I get up thinking about how do we move more low-income kids you know, through a good K through 12 education and then on to a post-secondary one. So they can come work for Insight, or go work in an Insight portfolio company and earn a good living, earn a good living for hard work and transform our nation.
So I want to dig into the model for the HBCU. Can I start with, you obviously talked about how Black students like going to HBCUs. Why are HBCUs important? Why do we have a world where we need colleges that are, you know, primarily just for Black students?
Well, first of all, they're not. I mean, so let's just be real clear about this. Historically, Black colleges were founded. 1 or 2 of them were founded prior to the Civil War, but most of them were founded after the Civil War. And they were founded in the South, and they were founded by missionaries, many of whom from the Methodist Church and the United Church of Christ, or then the Congregationalist Church, from the Presbyterian Church, from the the Catholic Church. A bunch of churches founded these, and they were founded by white missionaries for the formerly enslaved. These institutions, which were the only places, by and large, where earlier generations could go to college, they created traditions and ways of educating that actually were very forward-looking. I mean, they created a safe space and a nurturing space, and a space where you didn't feel like, I shouldn't be here, or nobody wants me here, and so that they socially and emotionally supported people on their learning journey. Because learning ain't easy; it's hard work, and you want to be someplace where you feel you should be. It's not a hostile environment. And then we did a lot of other things that were really cool. We established Black fraternities and sororities. We got the coolest marching bands going, and so we developed traditions. And I'm the kind of guy who believes that everything should be open to everybody, but we shouldn't necessarily erase, and not, let me just be more emphatic about that. We should not erase the identity of these institutions. I'm a firm believer in women's colleges. I taught at one of them, Spelman College, and I saw how affirming Spelman was of the young Black women who went to that school. But, I think that Wellesley and Bryn Mawr and a bunch of these other institutions have an important place to play. I believe in yeshivas. I believe that, that there are great institutions that are Jewish. They're not necessarily exclusive for Jewish students. And in the same, so I think there's there's a benefit in having special identity institutions, tribal colleges, and so I think, but the doors are open. I went to school with kids who were, even back in the 60s, we had white students. And when we didn't have them full-time enrolled, every spring, students from Bowdoin and Bates and other colleges in New England came and studied with us, and we sent students up there. And those exchanges were powerful and meaningful. So I don't see a problem with that. Today, historically Black colleges, are most often integrated in their graduate and professional programs. If you go to the Howard Medical School, or you go to the Morehouse School of Medicine, or you go to Meharry, you're going to see white students, you're going to see Asian students. So graduate and professional schools, students of other backgrounds are more, feel more open to it. But Morehouse has had a white guy as valedictorian. So we've never said you couldn't come. We just haven't been able to find a robust market of students who want to be and are willing to be in the minority. And I think that that's something that other people should learn to do, because I certainly have had to learn to do that. I mean, when I went up to Columbia in 1969 to study 16th century English literature, people said, "Who are you? What's Morehouse? Never heard of it. You shouldn't be. Should you be here?" Of course, I did very well, and then I decided I didn't want to stay there, so I went somewhere else. But I think that these kinds of these kinds of experiences are great, and but historically Black colleges, finish with this, they tend to be the first step on the ladder to education for young people who have not had that. So as I said, 75% of our students are low income, 50% are the first in their families. My grandson, who is a sophomore at Morehouse, is a 6th generation college graduate in our family. And most of those earlier generations have gone to Black colleges, and you find students who have that experience, but the vast majority of our students, this is the first time anyone in their family has gone to college.
So one thing that I was struck by when we were raising our last fund, we tried to have kind of outreach to the HBCU endowments to try to expose them to the venture asset class and kind of make investment. And the thing I was most struck by is how small the endowments are for the HBCUs. Like if you combined all of the HBCUs, what's their endowment?
Now, I taught literature. I didn't teach math. I didn't teach statistics. I'm bad, but it's. I think that the total endowment's about $2 billion for 100 institutions.
Right.
And that's,
Harvard's north of 40 for one.
yeah, look, Harvard is way north of 40,
yeah.
but and then that group of institutions, $1 billion of that is held by a very small number. It's held by Howard. Howard has, I think, a $750 million endowment. Then it's Spelman and Hampton and Morehouse. So it's a very small number. And the average endowment for an HBCU is a third that of its peer. And so one of the things that I'm very focused on as I look at creating a capital campaign is really to think about, can we do challenge grants for historically Black colleges, where for every dollar they put up, we match it and begin to build that. Because as wealth begets wealth, and you've got to be able to set some of this aside. Right now, for most historically Black colleges, they are tuition driven, and they're living off of their annual earned income. They don't have a lot of room for mistakes. And so a big piece of the work we do, when we started out, we were into the scholarships. Today and general fund. Right now, our big focus is how do we transform and scale historically Black colleges? And we think part of that is by helping them build assets so that they can, do with their assets what many higher education institutions do, and that is to get really smart investment opportunities and grow their endowment.
Well, and part of that is obviously by creating wealthy graduates who then kind of support their schools, like
that's absolutely true. Spelman College is just finishing up a capital campaign, and I loved it that they got their largest gift, I think, from an alumna who is Latanya Richardson Jackson, and she brought her husband along, Samuel L. Jackson, who is a Morehouse grad. Now, I don't know whether Sam has I don't think he's made the largest gift, but one of the things we are now beginning to see is alumni giving at a more robust clip and bigger gifts, because Black people are accumulating wealth. And I think we need to do just what our white peers have done, and that is to invest it in the institutions that are going to ensure the future of future generations.
But just talking about how we, if you still look at, there's a lot of careers, and tech is one of them, and we should certainly talk about that, where there's still significant underrepresentation, relative to the population. Many other professional careers like medicine and law also that challenge exists. So you can spend a little bit of time talking about, once you have the success of getting people into schools and getting them to graduate from these schools, the next step is making sure they've accessed all the right opportunities. So maybe we can spend a few minutes talking about that.
Yeah, one of the things that so as I said, 75% of our students are low income, and about 50% are the first in their families to go to college. So, you can imagine that when the entire family gets one of their kids going on to college, they want them to do something that they know.
Yeah.
They know so they want them to be a doctor. They want them to be a lawyer. They want them to
that happens in the Indian community as well.
I know, but we got to talk to that grandma and that granddad, and we got to say, look, there's some bigger opportunities, and I think we're beginning to break that stranglehold. At the same time, there've got to be more experiential opportunities for these young people. And so one of the things that we're very focused on is number one, we don't just say we judge the success of our colleges by how many students you graduate. We judge the success of our colleges by the career outcomes that we produce for them. Are they going into careers which, one, first of all, are rewarding and they value, but also, are they going into careers where they will earn at a level commensurate with the sacrifice they've made to get that education? And so part of it is that we've got to expand the opportunity vision that these students have. And so how do we do that? We do that by internships. We do that by apprenticeships. We begin earlier on, letting them see that there's a big world out there that isn't just certain professions that we're accustomed to.
So, I mean, let's talk about tech, because obviously this is probably a tech-heavy audience today. If you just look at Insight, we looked up the stats yesterday. We employ 126,000 people across our portfolio of companies, and today I think we have about 25,000 job openings. And I can't speak to what the pipeline for each one of those 25,000 is, but I'm willing to bet, based on my experience and the boards that I'm involved in, that we're still significantly underrepresented. By the way, not just in the Black community, but in the Hispanic community and other underrepresented communities. What do you think we, and I mean this is a collective we, not just Insight, but our portfolio companies, the tech community more broadly, do to kind of have that change, understanding that change can't happen overnight? And how do we make sure we sustain that effort?
Yeah, so I'm the dad of a senior software engineer, and she is working in San Francisco. Well, she's working remotely. I think right now she's down in LA. But I think about my daughter's journey. She's obviously not the first in her family to go to college. We made some early investments in her. She has an older sister who has a cognitive disability. And so when we brought in someone to work with her younger sister on math concepts, this daughter started doing that. She's younger, and we learned very quickly she's a real smart, she's very good at math. She started out as a physics major and a Japanese minor at a women's college, not Spelman in Atlanta, Agnes Scott. Didn't like it, transferred to Howard and took a computer science course. And she just went off. She had trouble after her first internship with Google because she didn't know enough computer science. They said, "You're not good enough to come back." And she just was determined, and she got a job with a company called Kleiner Perkins. She was a Kleiner Perkins fellow. And I said, "I don't think you got the consolation prize, Hallie. I think this is a good deal." And they put her in one of her companies. And she came back that next summer, after that summer experience in one of the Kleiner Perkins portfolio companies, and said, "Dad, I think I've learned as much as I can learn at Howard University. I'm not coming back. I'm going to stay in San Francisco, and I am going to get some more internships. And I'm going to," I said, "Well, and people in our family, we get college degrees." She said, and I said, "No, I just won't support you." She said, "I've saved enough money. I don't need your help. I'm gone." And she did that. And after she had another internship at Pinterest, and then she went to Lyft for a while, and she went somewhere else, and then she went back to Lyft. I would say that that's and throughout that journey, Devin, I listened to her. She would tell me about the technical interviews that she had. And as a Black woman, she would talk about the guys who weren't listening to her, who weren't looking at her, who really just assumed when she walked in the room that she didn't know what she was doing. So I would say that there are some real issues on the tech side, in tech. But I think the bigger story about what happened to my daughter was the early work that we did do and the other early work that we should have done. She told me that she was competing against people who had begun doing work, learning coding and all of that when they were 12 years old. So, I mean, I think that this is something that we've got to infuse into our education system. And, I've been a big supporter of K through 12 education. I spend a lot of time focused on that because that's my farm team for college students. Mike Bloomberg has announced a $750 million investment in creating high-performing charter schools. And a lot of that work will be done in southern states where Black colleges are located. And I have challenged them. I've said, I want to see high schools on HBCU campuses. I want to see kids going from a high school math class into a college math class. I want to see them going from an early software, computer science class I want to break down some of those barriers and obstacles. I want innovation in the way we educate, and I want expansive opportunities for Black kids, because that's the way we're going to get more people who are highly competitive and ready for the opportunities which I see occurring more and more in the tech community. And I think that would be so early work. And so for a company like Insight, I would say to them, yes, you want to get some really sharp financial analysts that can't come to you out of Black colleges. We got great kids there. But I think you've got to develop a farm team. I think it's got to be even earlier. And you've got to say that our future success is to provide more abundant opportunities and not ration them for young people. And I think if far-sighted business people were saying more of that, and really putting some effort behind it, we'd see that talent pipeline really building. When I serve on the board of the KIPP Foundation, which oversees the KIPP charter schools, and I have said to them, and I've been on that board for 16 years, and I've said to them, at the end of the day, the Black students that you're preparing for college are going to opt, because they will be first generation, disproportionately to go to HBCUs. And they say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, I did know what I was talking about, and a significant percentage of them are doing that. And when I got Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, and his wife, Patty Quillen, to actually come to visit Morehouse and Spelman, they were just blown away by what they heard from those KIPP alumni who said, I'm at the exact right institution for me at Spelman. I'm at the exact right institution for me at Morehouse. And they gave $40 million to each of those institutions to ensure that more kids, first generation, could go to the college of their choice. And so I think that, what I would say to an Insight, link up to K through 12 education. That's where the talent of the future is going to be. And also link up to minority serving institutions, including HBCUs, because there's a lot of talent there, but a lot of talent that doesn't get the kind of opportunities that students who go to elite institutions go to. And you'll get good talent there, but you won't get the diversity of background and experience.
They'd argue in K through 12, we probably just need some curricular changes that go beyond just the African-American community. I mean, my kids both graduated from an elite private school in New York, and they never had to take a computer science class. Now, they decided to do it during the high school, during summer vacation for fun.
Yeah.
And so it's now, one can have debates as to whether or not you should be required to take metal shop over computer science. And so I think there's
someone who took metal shop, print shop.
I did too.
And that makes me a great shopper at Home Depot, and I just got through painting a room, so I can do some of that stuff. But at the end of the day, I wasn't going to be a gardener, and I wasn't going to be, I didn't run the print shop that my family owned. So I do think that we need to change what kids are learning. And I want to say this to, so people say, well, how are we going to get education to change? Education is by its very nature not innovative and is not as forward-looking. And I think right now there's been a lot of pressure to transform K through 12. There needs to be a lot of pressure to transform the focus of higher education. How people can spend $50,000 a year going to an elite private institution, and then when they graduate and they find that degree in classics or whatever is not what they want to do, and then they got to go to a boot camp. They've got to go to a boot camp. I mean, that seems to me to be sinful. And so what I would say is that business needs to put more pressure on higher education to say, why is it that more of your graduates aren't career ready. Yes, we want them to be great citizens. We want them to have, an appreciation for the arts, all of those things. But at the end of the day, we also want them to be able to earn a good living and to feel like they're making a valuable contribution. And so I think a lot of that pressure needs to be there. But you do see innovation occurring. I mentioned to you, and I'm on a board. I just went on a board of a company called Handshake, and this is a company founded by a bunch of graduates of Michigan Tech, and they decided after they graduated that nobody was recruiting at Michigan Tech, and they thought they were just as good as people who went to MIT and Caltech. How dare they think that? But and so what they did was they created
kind of a test to be able to prove that.
Well, not only that, but they've now created a company, and their company has millions of students signed up to be recruited virtually, because then I can go visit. I don't have to go visit the 5 institutions that we think are core to our business. I can visit 500 institutions using a tech platform.
So Michael, here's a question for you. So you're on the board now of a tech company, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the metrics that you ask for as a board member as it relates to diversity?
I gotta say, I was on I was on another tech company board that will remain nameless, and it was a higher ed tech company. And I raised a lot of those issues, and they basically said, "You're on a soapbox, get off of it." So I'm trying to figure out what are the right questions for me to ask. And so when I go onto a company board, I'm a relationships person. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk to and meet with young people who are working there. And when I went on this one, one of the first meetings they had me before I got elected to the board was actually to meet with their Black employees organization and to hear how they viewed their experience. And it was a really exciting conversation, and I learned a lot about the company from their point of view. So I want to see what every board member wants to see. I want to see numbers. I want to see strategy. I want to see outcomes. I want to see risk taking. And when it proves that that's the wrong approach to take, then I think we should fast fail and move on to other approaches. But I do think that, I am seeing with a number of the tech companies and the very big ones, this recognition that they haven't been strong in diversity. We've been working very closely with Google, that is now today making major investments in historically Black colleges. And just one other point here, it's not just, are we going to hire software engineers? It's not just, are we going to have people in the C-suite? These companies have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs. And are they giving communities in which they're located the opportunity to prepare people for those jobs? A lot of these companies are located in Atlanta, and they're locating, frankly, in neighborhoods that have been traditionally Black. And I see them asking the question, how do I build a facility in that company and also get employees out of that company, out of that community? And how do I help to transform the economics of that neighborhood? And those are tougher questions, but I think ones that—
I think, Michael, just to throw something out that I think you could play a really important kind of role in, is that, I think all of us as board members, and I'll just speak for myself, I kind of know what questions to ask in the financial section. What's your customer acquisition cost? What's your net revenue retention? I kind of know what the questions to ask in the strategy session. And I'm pushing my companies to report on HR. We always looked at that, turnover rates, but we never looked at it by race. And now we are. And I look at the data, but I actually don't know what the right follow-up questions are. And I mean that genuinely. And I think that as you kind of think about all the partnerships you have with these large companies, and you look and you start seeing best practices around those things, I think that would be a really useful thing for UNCF to think about doing a convening on. I know I'd be interested in it because I think we all want to get better here, but we need the best practices. And I've looked, the way I normally look, which is through Google. And I haven't really found anything great. And so I think there's an opening there.
Well, let me just tell you, I intend to get smarter on this issue. And, I have always viewed my job on boards that I serve on to be, I want to be careful how I say this, a pain in the behind. I think if you go in there, and I kind of got that from Vernon Jordan, Vernon, who died last year and was, by the way, at one point the president of the United Negro College Fund. He said, he went into those rooms with the intention of making a difference. You don't make a difference by just being comfortable and going along. So I think that you have to ask tough questions. I want to build a team relationship. I want to be trusted, but I also want to push. And so I think I've got to get smarter at that.
I know at Insight, we'd love to collaborate with you on something like that. And if we can create some best practices, I think it's something that many in our portfolio would find useful. I think, and I'm sure other firms and other companies would find useful as well.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, I think it's the future. I think that there's, and it's not, and this is about race, but it's also about gender. It's also about gender identity. It's about all of the diversity that makes up this world in which we live, in this country in which we live, and where, we ought to be able to figure out how to peacefully coexist as opposed to violently annihilate.
Well, so I thought, given that you say that, and you're really referencing the 67 speech, which I read again, or read really for the first time yesterday. I thought we'd end. He quotes James Russell Lowell at the end of that speech, and I thought I would read that. He says, "Once to every man and nation." This is the poem. "Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide, in the strife of truth with falsehood, for the good or evil side. Some great cause, God's new Messiah, offering each the gloom or blight, and the choice goes by forever, twist the darkness and the light. Though the cause of evil prosper, yet 'tis truth alone is strong, though a portion to be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong. Yet that scaffold swots the future, and behind the dim unknown, standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own." And then he ends with this sentence. He says, "If we will make," and now he's referring to Vietnam really, but I think it has a broader meaning. "If we will make the right choice, we will be able to speed up the day all over America and all over the world, when justice will roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream."
Yes. And I gotta say, it's only Martin Luther King who could get us to read and appreciate James Russell Lowell and his beautiful and challenging words. And, God bless him. And I would just say, I close my remarks with saying, God is watching all of us as we come to terms with the fierce urgency of now. Well, certainly future generations are depending on us. Thank you, Deb.
Michael, thank you, and have a great weekend and a great MLK day. And I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful experience.
Bye-bye.